Thanks, Jen. Great to see everybody here, and a spread from across our three partners. In just about 80 days, we're not going to be saying I'm from DIT, or I'm from IT Tala, or I'm from IT Blanchardstown, because they won't exist anymore. We will be TU Dublin, and we need to start thinking as TU for Dublin, I think, immediately. And this program is one initiative that helps us to start thinking about TU Dublin. Now, I'm a graduate from College of Technology, Kevin Street. And what I thought was interesting, because I always kept them, was my final year exams from electrical engineering. And the exam paper, and we all know what the exam papers look like, it had College of, apart from the examiners and the external examiners, College of Technology, Kevin Street, it had the program, electrical engineering, final year 4. But above it all was Dublin Institute of Technology. And this was back in 1980. Dublin Institute of Technology was not established legally until 1990. But what was occurring at the time was the coordination through an academic council structure of the academic outputs of the colleges that became Dublin Institute of Technology. So early academic collaboration. So that was positive on the one hand. But if I also look at what we managed to achieve, and at this stage I was long gone, I was in the United States, but in the period from the establishment of DIT legally in 1990 up for the next decade, up until the year 2000, we had 6 colleges that to a large extent continued to operate the way they'd always operated. They still had exams offices and registrations offices. They still ran programs, even though in another college some of the same programs ran. And it took about a decade before there was a restructuring, which was called the Faculty Structures Agreement, which was really a mechanism to try and say, well, hold on a minute, what we need is a school of mechanical engineering, and we need a school of physics and a school of chemistry, and we should be bringing the people together who are teaching in there. And that took a while then for that to get implemented. And when I came into DIT as the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering, we had a number of people in Bolton Street who had different disciplines, but they weren't engineering lecturers. And one of the issues was, well, how do we handle that? And over the course of a number of years, we decided that one of the things that we needed in engineering was a multidisciplinary approach to how we actually delivered engineering. And it took a long time for us to figure out how to get there, but eventually when we restructured the Faculty of Engineering combined with the Faculty of Built Environment, we formed this new school called the School of Multidisciplinary Technologies. And it has actually grown from strength to strength because it enables a discussion associated with the modern way we need to teach engineering. So I speak from an engineering perspective. And the fact that engineering students are better if they have exposure to a wider range of skills. We've also been successful with respect to research projects and funding in terms of the preparedness of graduates from engineering schools for careers in industry. So it has worked out really well. But it took a long time for us to do that, if you think about it from the perspective of the establishment of DIT. So now fast forward to today, and we're talking about team teaching awards and fellowships. This is an attempt to try and learn from what the path we've walked previously, and to say, well, let's start to try and do this in a multidisciplinary way, one of the criteria, and in a multi-campus way, one of the criteria associated with these awards. So these, while they may appear to be small enough in the overall scheme of things, they can be quite important from the perspective of what we're trying to achieve, and they can be very important from the perspective of the teams that actually are going to win these awards. So I think this is fundamentally important. I'd like to thank the LTTC, the Learning, Teaching and Technology Centre, which is at the moment the DIT Learning, Teaching and Technology Centre, but will soon enough represent our learning, teaching and technology expertise for TU Dublin, which again is an important step. And again, from one of my external roles, I happen to be president of the European Society for Engineering Education. So as part of that, I visit and talk with many engineering universities across Europe with respect to how they do it. And what is clear is that from the most research-intensive universities such as TU Delft, KU Leuven, etc., they have centres for teaching and learning. We have a centre for teaching and learning. We need to try and ensure that we nurture, develop, support, and that that particular centre, our LTTC, reaches out across the campuses that TU Dublin has to ensure that we bring all of our strengths to bear to help our teachers be better teachers, to help our academics be better academics. And we've got national award winners in the room today in terms of their teaching excellence that we can hopefully leverage as well as we look at going forward. So I fully support and applaud this initiative, and I hope the workshop goes really well in terms of sharing the types of information that's needed. Jen?
This is why we're here today. DIT has had a history of teaching fellowships. We had some money left a few years back from a SIFT project, and we were looking for ways in which we could spend the money, and it seemed a really good idea to establish teaching fellowships. These are slightly different from seed-funded projects in that they were nominated or determined by the colleges. They were linked into strategic plans which were of a priority within each of the colleges, and they helped to inform practice within each of the colleges. Over the years, we have supported 55 teaching fellowships, and they're always worth a read because there's a wide range of subjects included within the teaching fellowships, and they're available through Arrow. A couple of years back, we decided that we would change the strategy round about teaching fellowships to do something more holistically across the whole college rather than individual college-based activities. And we instigated a call for a Team Teaching Award to address some of the issues that have been raised around about assessment and feedback within the DIT. As everybody be aware, it is a challenge to manage assessment and feedback effectively across programs and across an institution. And one way to do something about that was to involve a project team and looking at all the documentation, all the feedback that we'd received from students, and then putting forward a set of recommendations that we could put into practice across the institution. This project, the successful project recipients were led by Zini Motier, and many of us in DIT certainly are aware of Zini's work. I think the strength of the project application that came over to the review panel was this holistic thinking and this representation of academic staff and students from across all of the different colleges to work together and come up with a set of recommendations. So it's near the end of the project at the moment, and just talking to Zini and talking to the project team is going to be a really useful set of recommendations arising from that. So on the basis of that, it was decided when we were looking to develop a curriculum framework for the TU to use this model because it seemed to be a scalable model that would be appropriate to all three institutions. It was collaborative, and it was going to engage everybody, all the key stakeholder groups, including ourselves in the centre, including students, and see where we could come up with something that would really work effectively for all programme teams, because this is a major project. So the more collaboration, the better. So we put out a call, managed to get some funding from within the DIT, and also contributions from Tala and Blanchardstown, which we're very grateful. The call has gone out for project teams to submit a 12 or 18-month project, and we're looking for the project team to develop a curriculum framework and an implementation plan. We're aware that this is a significant project, it's a significant piece of work, and if you look at parallels in other institutions internationally, you'll be aware that this kind of activity is one that's done incrementally, and to do it really effectively, it takes time. It's a change management project. So it is really important. That's why we have to have such really good people involved in terms of the teaching fellowship project. What we wanted is just to capture the richness and the diversity of what the TU is going to look like, and we have a lot to contribute. We have a very good foundation in all three institutions of which to build, and everybody can contribute to this. And I think a key element of this process, and I think that's one of the reasons why we went to a Teaching Fellowship Award, it needs to be collaborative by nature. Everybody needs to feel as if they're involved in some way and they can relate to this curriculum framework in the future. And that's all stakeholders. That is students, it's all academic staff, it's all professional services, it's employers, everybody that's going to be involved in that. And that needs to be integral within the project proposal. And this is core, as I say, to everything that we do. It will impact on all programs. So what are we meaning by the curriculum? And we could spend quite a lot of time going around definitions between frameworks and design, etc. But certainly to the development team, we are considering the development of curriculum in the broadest sense, because it isn't just what happens in formal spaces, it's the informal spaces, online. It's about being involved in clubs and societies. It's the richness of activities from when it's GAA or involvement in clubs and societies, going out in workplace, working together with community groups, working together as peers, as other students, etc. It's all of that, and we need to capture that richness within whatever is prepared in terms of the curriculum framework. We have a lot of research, and we'd be instrumental in helping academics from the centre to look at what is current and see what actually works. We're much more aware over the last 20 years of what does work effectively. And there's a lot of work, for example, around about student retention and various other aspects of curriculum design. And key within this is the whole concept of engaging, generating a sense of belonging. Engaging is an active learning process, but engaging with stakeholders, engaging with colleagues, etc., as part of a sort of student retention and success program. It's also about the development and the capacity. It's learning and building on internal capacity, and it's developing students as autonomous learners. So they are empowered when they go out into the workplace afterwards. They have the key skills, the graduate skills, and have the reputation as a TU graduate as something that is in demand and desirable. And I've put some into place as global citizens, as active citizens with the key sort of skills to succeed in the future. But it's also it's an institutional commitment. It isn't just about the LTC or you as a program team. If we're going to do this, it needs to be integrated into all systems, the quality assurance processes, staff development, it needs to be rewarded. Everything needs to be adopted within this curriculum framework, or else it isn't really going to work. So we have to everybody has to buy into it. So that's why it's important that there's a really extensive consultation phase within this particular process. Some of you will be familiar with the curriculum framework, which we use as a basis for some of the initial discussions round and about what a curriculum framework would look like. And I've just put this example up here because it kind of captures some of the elements of the activities which the TU is engaged with. Core concepts within this are about building learning communities, about creating this new type of graduate that I was talking about. It's about the enriching educational experiences, maybe not necessarily, as I say, in the classroom. It could be online, working with students and communities, or etc. And it's about building this internal knowledge of capabilities as we're developing skills based around about, say, learning analytics. Are there interventions that we could utilise to make student experience enhance? Are there crucial times where we need to be working with students to help them to succeed? What would it look like? Well, some of the elements that we looked at previously are around about a curriculum that is connected. It's not disjointed modules. Students can see there is a clear connection through themes, multidisciplinary themes, and it could be between assessment, across disciplines, or content. So they can see where they are in terms of a learning journey from when they sign up to a program right the way through and after they become alumni. The whole enriching educational experiences, all these things that we're really good at, the community engagement, engaging with international students, clubs and societies, etc. So that there is an active process. And we've thought about putting in these kind of activities within that actually is timetabled elements within the programs as connections modules, for example. Could be another term, but they're actually seen to be as important that they're actually integrated into the curriculum. They're not seen as additional bolt-on activities. Those are key strengths, and what makes our graduates so strong is this concept of professionalism, and of inquiry-based learners. We want our students to be engaged. We want them to be entrepreneurs. We want them to be curious. All these graduate attributes that we also espouse towards. So where is that actually going to happen within the curriculum? What kind of activities? What are we going to reward? What are we going to be seen to value? We also need to have a global perspective of internationalising the curriculum, partly because many of our graduates are actually going to work abroad, maybe for a period of time and return. We're now attracting, I think it's about a quarter of our students are now international students. So how are we making the most of this diversity? We have a great strength in diversity within different students with disabilities who know that they'll be supported within our 3 institutions and help to achieve their potential. And the new type of graduate, what is actually that going to be? How is it integrated? How will students get feedback in the development of these graduate attributes or key skills within the curriculum? How are they going to get assessed? It's the only way in which students can see if something is being valued, if it's integral within a programme. And core at the bottom, I suppose, with all of the activities that we promote is this concept of learning communities. There's a lot of research around it about the support for first-year students, this whole sense of belonging. So it's a sense of belonging as part of a first-year cohort, but also as part of the DIT or Blanchardstown or Tala. It's also being part of a community of a professional body or a discipline. So our curriculum needs to consider all of those aspects of it. So what will a TU Dublin curriculum framework look like? I'm going to pass over to my colleague Claire.
So I suppose to contextualise this and thinking about previous work we would have done with schools and with colleagues across this institution, and that's been going on nationally and internationally, we thought it'd be useful just to give a little perspective on that from a sort of broader view. And as Jen has already said, the curriculum framework is broader than just a programme or a module. We're thinking about a structure that supports the design and also the enactment of curricula. This isn't something that's going to sit on a shelf. It's actually something we want people to be able to use to inform what they're doing and respond to how things change as well. So curriculum, we often have an exercise in our diploma workshops here, for example, where we ask people to try and define curriculum, and it turns out to be one of those words we all use and actually never get around to defining or thinking about, and we come up with numerous definitions. Sometimes people think of their CV as the first time they've heard the word, or they think of the NCCA, which is the body that organises curriculum for school levels. And there it means something quite prescriptive, which is not really the take that we have on it in higher education. So it's something for us that goes beyond programme documentation. It goes beyond what we think of as syllabus or reading list. It's not just the content or the timetable. So we're encouraging all of you interested in this project to think in that broader way about curriculum. Something that's student-centred and also graduate-centred, as Jen has just been saying. What's the student experience going to be in this curriculum? What's the graduate going to look like who's emerging from what we're doing in our institution? It reflects our mission, our vision and our values as an institution. And that's something, again, that we can very easily lose sight of because we're so busy day to day. We're often very close to our disciplines, and we might feel closer to geographers down the road than geographers in our own institution. So trying to stay in tune with where our institution is going. To think of curriculum perhaps as a process and not so much as a product. And again, when we're very busy, we think about covering things with our classes, getting through things, getting to the end of the year. And that the time pressure can dictate a lot of that. But the process of how we get there is very important, particularly when we think of student experience, graduate attributes and so on. And there's something as well that can enable change and the development of teaching in our disciplines. So perhaps if we take a real step outside for a moment and think about this week, you have a huge, important, significant report on something like climate change getting lots of attention in the media. Does that relate to curriculum? And I would be suggesting, and I think we would all be suggesting here, that it does relate to it because our institution may respond to that, our government might respond to that. So how are we responding to it through curriculum? Are we going to refocus on sustainability? Are we going to focus on the targets that we're all going to have to meet around that? So it's contextualising what we do ultimately in the global sense and in terms of national priorities as well. So there is lots written about curriculum as well, and I suppose in preparing for a project of this kind, we would encourage people perhaps to look around at some of the literature, the grey literature as we might call it, that's out there about curriculum, the models and frameworks that have been talked about around that. This is just a taster, a starter for 10 today, but we can share these references with you after today on the website. This is an excerpt from Geraldine O'Neill's ebook. Geraldine is based at UCD, but also has had a strong national profile in this area, and she worked with the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning for some time. So a lot of her work certainly would respond to the sector as a whole and help the sector. This is one of the ebook's graphics, and it just talks about product and process. And again, this is very challenging when we start to think about curriculum in these terms. That we're moving perhaps from what might be called teacher-centeredness towards student-centeredness. Perhaps our traditional models were somewhere around here. We're thinking more now of how we can negotiate curriculum, how the student might be an owner, a stakeholder of the curriculum as well, or are we mixing ourselves somewhere in between these approaches? Are we blending our approaches and gradually fostering greater independence and partnership from our students? It can depend on our disciplines, depend on our learner profiles and so on, but something that we might think about as we're thinking about development of the curriculum. This is another piece of work by Evans in the UK, who's reinvented a little bit of the thinking around curriculum based on Bloom's taxonomy, talking about how we might organise around Bloom's taxonomy and some of these verbs we see getting used in our learning outcomes to encourage us to move beyond the knowledge stages up to the higher order learning, as we sometimes call it, so getting into analysis, evaluation by students, and ultimately knowledge creation. And perhaps challenging us to think that this isn't necessarily postgraduate work, this could be part of the curriculum all along. How can we foster that higher order learning all the way through? And she also challenges to think about the other domains of Bloom, so those of you who might have looked at Bloom and colleagues' work, there are metacognitive, in other words, the learning to learn, the management of learning domains, and affect, so the motivation, the emotional interaction of the student with the institution. These are all areas that are up for discussion at the moment, an ongoing debate when we think about curriculum design. I think in general we see a trend as well to move towards a more holistic view, and I've tried to capture that in a very simplistic way in this slide. This is based on John Biggs's work, which is around programme learning outcomes and module learning outcomes being developed, and very often we are dealing with this so much day to day that tends to inform our concept of curriculum, whereas if we try and encourage ourselves towards a more holistic view, this again is a graphic from Geraldine O'Neill's work, and she makes the point that often we start here with our programme aims and learning outcomes and our module learning outcomes, and actually she's suggesting we should have 2 steps before that, what she terms educational philosophy. What we've been talking about in terms of mission, vision, values need to come into play here, then some consideration of our curriculum models, whether we're process, product, a blend that we want to discuss together, and how we capture that in a framework for our institution before we get to the stage of thinking there are descriptors and templates that have to go to a committee on a particular date. So it's encouraging a broader view of this all around, I think, is what we see reflected in the work nationally and internationally. I think Jen has probably addressed some of these issues already in what she said, but again, just to reflect that this is part of the broader literature, broader development around curriculum. This is one of the means that we structure curriculum design project in the diploma, so asking people again to start with the broader view, the context in which we're working, then get to the models, the methods, thinking then about graduate attributes, something like community engagement or placement. More and more these days we've become conscious of terms like universal design, so not just inclusive practice and teaching, but the universal design principles we could apply to the whole curriculum. And importantly, that it's not a finished product, that we recognise that curriculum is an iterative process. And I think in your projects we'd again encourage you to think about what that evaluation strategy looks like. What's the ongoing development of the curriculum going to look like, and how is that structured through the framework? I suppose just finally to point out that this is part of a bigger story. There's lots of curriculum design work going on in higher education and has been for many years. But I think particularly if we can say post-recession or pre-Brexit, post-recession in the last number of years, we've seen a lot of large-scale projects, perhaps coming out of the desire to respond to that crisis and try and ensure that we're ready for similar issues in the future or what might be coming down the line. We've seen this in the UK and beyond in the international context to address sectoral change, also social change, the change that's happening because of technologies, etc. And just to highlight that what we might call our colleagues in the traditional universities are recognising the need to reconnect research and teaching. I know that colleagues here would say the TU has something of a head start on this, what we might call a head start, because we've connected research and teaching. We've interacted with industry, with the communities for so many years around our institutions, and that's what they're now turning to address in some of the big universities nationally and internationally, London, UCL and LSE, but the connected curriculum that they've developed is now part of major curriculum project work at Galway, UCC, Trinity, and others are all turning their attention to this as well. So I suppose the bottom line is this is an ongoing iterative process, and in seeking to develop our projects here, we're not only thinking of the needs of the TU, but we're also looking at that trend nationally and internationally. Okay, again, just some key references. They're not very clear on the slide, so we'll make sure to pass those on to you after today in case they're useful to development of your work. That's it for me. So me.
Okay, what am I here to talk about? It seems to have been really well covered. But I think what Mike, what Jen and Claire has gone through is an awful lot of the content and really kind of the passion behind why you're all here. Maybe I'm going to take a little bit of the passion out of it by talking about process at the moment. Because what Jen had asked me to do was just to talk a little bit about how do we put the application together to improve the probability that your project can be evaluated favourably and potentially some funding coming to you. So how's that in terms of exciting? Not sure. So just with that, when Jen had sent on some of the literature to me, one of the first things that I took out clearly was around the application form, you know what I mean, and what kind of things would go into the application. And it looks very friendly, doesn't it? And then I got down to this part here. Where's the shiny thing? Oh. The star, there it is. Thanks, Claire. We got down to this part here, and that's when I kind of get the heebie-jeebies, and I look at detailed description, no more than 5 pages. So clearly we have an awful lot to get into, to pack into that, to really show the value that your project is going to bring in the context of the overall curriculum. Okay, so then I went on my own little whistle-stop tour of what that could potentially look like. So obviously I'm not trying to, probably for many of you that have filled in many applications and are well versed in this, this is not for you, you already know it. But maybe for people it's their first time and they're getting involved in this and they'd like to apply for it and they just need a little bit more detail behind this, that's what I'm going to look at. And indeed I think it's important as well for those that evaluate the applications when they're coming in, that there's an element of consistency with the content that comes in so that funds can be disseminated appropriately and fairly. Okay. So, so where did I start? I love my graphics, okay? So we started off with an overall of what the application form was going to look like and the kind of content that potentially you could dive into and provide in your application when you're looking for funding. So within I'm going to start in the blue box right in the middle. So first of all, we have the HEA on the outside. we're working in the TU, and your project is going to form part of this curriculum framework, okay? And that's obviously all sitting in a broader context of higher education. So if we take a deep dive into the project itself, okay, what's going on inside of it, and what do you need to get across in that detailed description of your project, no more than 5 pages, okay? So hopefully this will provide a little bit of focus. So what we need to be clear about is our project goal, so really what that is, and I'll speak a little bit more about that. So really, what is your project going to achieve in the greater context of both of the curriculum, the TU, and within higher education, okay? So that needs to be really explicit, and is normally a one-liner, okay, that really captures that. And there's a bit of a process that you need to go through in order to be able to articulate that and get the sweet spot, okay? Once you have the goal then, how, so that's the what, how am I going to do this? How is my project going to reach this goal? So this is where we need to articulate some of our objectives, which are the big, broad statements of how our project is going to be realised. Then the detail has to come in, so all the tasks and the subtasks that everyone has to complete within the project, and that will lead to some really good deliverables, because this is where some of our evidence-based stuff comes in, doesn't it? So we have to be able to evidence that our project has actually been effective and sits within the context of the curriculum, which has been envisaged at a strategic level, and then how it moves the TU forward. And always within that, we're looking at how much do we need? We love that one, okay? We need to look at how long we have to do it, okay? So we were looking at a 12 to 18 month time frame, Jen, I think I saw on your slide. And then always it has to be of really good quality. That's what we all want in our work, okay? So who determines quality? So there's a piece of a process that we have to go through with that as well. This is sitting within, kind of, is being nestled within the project team. They deliver this project. So if you're thinking of putting in an application at the moment, you're thinking, well, who do I need on this team? What are the expertise I really need that will help me with this? And who do I need to engage with in a broader context by way of stakeholders? Okay, so that's what we're going to look at in a little bit of detail. Now, Mike actually made an interesting point earlier on, which was really the road that we've come down with regard to where curriculum and this connected curriculum, where it has come from, okay? And it has taken a number of years and a series of steps that we've come through. So a very important part of the project application that you send in probably is a very clear articulation of your project context and where that sits in the overall framework. So first of all, what we need to look at is every project that you're thinking of at the moment is basically going to be responding to a higher education need or an opportunity that's in higher education. So we need to be really, really explicit about identifying what that opportunity is or what that need actually is. Okay, so that's a really important expression. And clearly, I think, as Claire was saying, we need to ground that in the literature. So it's not just, an idea we've pulled out, but it's really well researched in that. International best practice is part of that, because that's some of our evidence-based content. But also what's important when we're looking at this bigger picture of our project is where your project sits in the vision and mission of this new TU Dublin that's about to be designated. Okay? Because it's really important that we're showing that we're not running away and not aligned. And I think, both Jen and Claire made this point that we remain aligned with what the vision and the mission of the TU actually is. And we have lots of really great material to draw on from colleagues that have come before us. Okay, so we've plenty to consider. So the first part is getting that kind of higher, kind of aspirational goal, in terms of broader higher education needs and opportunities. But when you're looking at your project context, it might be a suggestion also to really look at, well, where are we currently in our institutional path? So what's our current position? Okay, because we could set a really grandiose project that could take us 30 years to get there. You heard what Mike said earlier. This has been happening over a couple of decades. So it's great to have ambitions, but we need to be realistic how we can break them down. And what can you do with 30 grand, really? So we need to be really clear how we are contributing, not only in our school and our department, our school, our college, or whatever, but in the TU and the bigger landscape. So that means we need to do an assessment of our current position versus this desired position. So what are we doing within our departments and schools and everything at the moment? and what do we do really, really well? And then based on this vision that we have, what could be in place? And what that gives us then is something that we call the gap analysis. And it's that gap that gives you your funding application. That's where your project is. Okay, the gap is what's kind of, you know, bridging where we are now to where we would like to be, but in a realistic, grounded context. Okay. So once we have this gap analysis and this informs the project goal, then we can develop that really clear, articulate project goal. So that's the one-liner, okay? So, you know, what? The project goal is always talking about what this project is going to do, and that needs to be really clear. So it's a high-level statement, okay, that provides this overall context. It is future-oriented, as I said, and it's grounded in our current reality, so it's really very realistic, okay? And many of you, you know, will be aware of this acronym here. The goal needs to be SMART, because sometimes we can become very verbose in this, and really we need to be able to get to the point, because remember, our key metric here is 5 pages or less that we have to do it in, so we need to be able to articulate it. So it needs to be very, very specific, and we need to measure it. Now, probably with a project management background, I'm always interested in the measurement. So it's not only the measurement of the project, I need to get this piece of work done in this piece of time. How am I going to do it? And I'm going to measure my timelines. But what is your contribution measuring? Is it going to reduce attrition? Is it going to, you know, kind of increase retention? What is it actually going to do? You know, can it contribute in a broader context? And this is what I'm really hearing in the connected piece, that we're not in our little modules and our departments. It's a much bigger thing that we need to bring people in and figure out how we can make a difference. So we have the goal that's grounded in a clear context, and then we break it down into our objectives. And the objectives here is how am I going to do it? And the objectives is really going to be looking at the really broad steps of how we're going to reach that goal, okay? So they address how the gap between our current state and the goal will be closed, okay? Once we have that, so if we have a goal and then how we're going to do it, we begin to then really understand what the deliverables of this project are going to be. And again, often what I find in reviewing applications and stuff like that is that we fall down a little bit on the deliverables, that we're really not explicit about exactly what it is that we're going to provide. So the more due diligence and thinking we can put into that, it improves the probability that the concept of our project will be realised, because we're really clear about what it's going to provide. So the deliverable is something that's going to be produced or provided as a result of a process. So am I going to produce an app? Am I going to provide online training material? You know, what exactly is it? And it could be 20 things that your project is going to produce, or it might be just one, okay? And all of those deliverables must have a really clear owner who's responsible for its delivery with that due date, okay? So what we've said is we have goal, we have objectives, and we have these deliverables. So what's this process I'm talking about? So a deliverable is something that's produced or provided as a result of the process. Now here's some nice project management language, okay? That process is where we break down the tasks into subtasks, and it's called actually a work breakdown structure, so we're breaking down the work. So again, this is an area where we find often our projects can go awry because we haven't really thought about how much work it takes to get into it. And if we're looking at a broader, kind of looking at well-being of our staff, how many of our staff take on projects, get maybe 2 or 3 hours bought off their timetable, but are actually spending 50 hours a week on it, and we've burnout and we've stressed out people, and that's not a great environment for us all to come back into. So it really is worth the time and the effort to look at this breakdown structure, and it looks at the specific tasks and subtasks that must be completed in order to reach that deliverable. Okay. Now, as I said, we have the project goal, the project objectives, the details, which is the work breakdown structure, and a deliverable. That's it. That's all you're doing. You know, it's that easy. But obviously a huge amount of work, as I said, it has to be nestled in these stakeholders that we have. And again, not only are, you know, like DIT is a very big institute in and of itself, but now we're moving into this TU context, and we've got 2 other cultures that we're trying to work across who do things in a very different way. So this consultation and this ability to engage and collaborate is very, very different. And this takes time and patience when we look at stakeholder engagement. And by the way, there's no perfect way to do it. You know what I mean? So it's not something that's ever 100% accurate, but it does need some recognition and time. So we know that stakeholders are really anybody that has a vested interest in the project, that will benefit from it or could be hurt by it if it goes wrong in any way. So we need to be very mindful of those people. And within that then, personally what I find useful, but that's probably left-hand side of my brain, the rational part of my brain, is when we're looking at stakeholder engagement is to use a tool called RACI. Okay, and what this shows with our stakeholder engagement is who is responsible for our project. So you know all those tasks and subtasks, who's going to make it happen, who really is responsible for that. Okay, and that's not 3 people, that's consultation. There is one person that actually does stuff, and that's person responsible. Then we have accountable. You know, who does the buck really stop with? So if you get 30 grand worth of an application, you need to deliver something, don't you? So that person, probably the project manager, is going to be accountable for that. Okay? And who, really importantly, is going to be consulted in that process versus informed. Okay, so clearly we're working across our partner institutes. There's different, again, part of the criteria, as I understand it, is that, you know, it has to be multi-level in terms of the range of roles of people that we're bringing in, multidisciplinary, and obviously it's a partner institution collaboration. So as a visual, what can be very easy to show all the different type of people that are involved in your project. And again, this is something that was in the application form that was being asked, both directly in terms of project manager, project participants, but the stakeholders can be a little bit more elusive. And this can be a very effective way for your project to be able to demonstrate the lengths that you've gone to participate and to collaborate with our colleagues. And this brings me kind of to the last broad section, which is around the project team organisation. So again, in the application form, the first couple of sections of that was who's the project manager and who were your project team members going to be. Okay, and again, this is meant to be collaborative. We're working kind of from a competence base. So who do you need as part of your project team? So clearly when we're looking at that, there's an element of selection criteria. So who, what knowledge, what skills, what abilities should the people on this project actually have? So this could be, you know, specific research focus. So again, people that maybe have done research on program design. So again, we're getting the literature box tick there. There could be people that have specific expertise, such as in e-learning, or we could have specific expertise just with people who have been through the ropes with funded research projects and know the nuances and the operational things that can go wrong. So that's really valuable experience. So who do you need to balance that team out? So that's important. Again, part of the criteria that both Mike and Jen alluded to is that it has to be multidisciplinary, okay, so that we have this cross-section of our TU in there, but also diversity in roles, because all of these stakeholders have a very, very different perspective on how the curriculum can be delivered, because they all experience different obstacles and opportunities within that. So we need to be quite explicit about that. And anything around a project, what's really, really important is that roles are clear for people, because this is again where your project can go down and money can be kind of burnt away unnecessarily because, oh, I thought you were doing it, oh, I thought you were doing it, and there can be a little bit of confusion on that. So that's important to articulate. And again, as I said, when we're looking at the project, we need to look at what do we need to run it effectively. Okay, so we're looking at the dollar sign and where or the euro sign and where the money is actually going to go. So again, some of the money may go in terms of work effort and hours that you might want to buy out. Okay, and you want to make sure that that's adequately reflected in the project. The cost of acquiring maybe external expertise for the project, so is there particular people we need to engage with. And other costs, you know, it could be equipment, it could be travel, so that needs to be really clearly captured. And again, that will affect the scope of how much this project can do and how ambitious it can be. So, if we look back again at this application form that was sent out, what would that framework, that kind of project framework, help fill in? What boxes will it help fill in? So again, if we look at the project title, the project manager, the project team and their details, okay, that's reflected inside 12, okay, which is all around this team organisation structure, okay. If we look at, again, the timeline, how long is this going to take? We're looking again at slides 7 and 8, okay. So these deliverables and that work breakdown structure will tell you how long it's going to take, and really do, my advice would be take your time on this part. This is the piece we rush through and we get wrong, and then we blow our budget and we blow our timeline, okay. If we look at team details, or costs, I mentioned there earlier on, if we look at team details, again, is slide 11 and 12. Who is going to do what, and why did we choose these people on the team? So we provide CVs and stuff, but CVs are quite heavy to get through. So if we can provide that kind of, snapshot of what they're bringing and contributing, really, really helpful for people who are evaluating the project. And then finally, that lovely big box in no more than 5 pages. What is it that you need to get across in those 5 pages? And that's the goal, the objectives, your work breakdown structure, and your deliverables. Okay? And that then hopefully will mean it will really focus the thinking and help improve the probability that your project will be funded and supported. How's that? Make sense? Okay, great.
Thanks. So a lot of us have been involved in the project design and or the call, including the heads of learning development across each of the institutions, and obviously colleagues in the centre. So we just want to make explicit that we really want to work with the project team, and there's ways in which we want to sort of make that evident in terms of our level of commitment. So we're really happy to allocate between 50 and 100 hours of our time over the 2-year period. This is something we would negotiate with whoever the successful project team is. So it might not necessarily be the LTC here, but obviously CELT and ITB staff as well. So whoever is going to work to support the project work. What we can offer you, certainly as a centre and also CELT, I'm sure as an ITB, we can negotiate round about this, but we just thought it would be useful to give a little snapshot of areas where we felt that we could contribute usefully. Obviously, we're educational researchers, so that's part of our role, and we support the programmes, and we're supervising doctoral students. So from that, we would be able to give you a lot of the current curriculum design thinking and practices. We are engaging with many colleagues internationally and nationally, so we'd be aware of what's actually happening. But obviously, we support a number of continuous professional development programs and master's projects, so we would have extensive expertise around about designing educational research processes, aspects around data collection, analysis methods, or whatever, if that would be useful to you. We can support as well around about data collection, emergent theme identification analysis, and also just modes of dissemination. We would be involved in a variety of projects. We work closely with various committees, so we can use that to feed in any outputs that come from the project. We had a strategy employed with the LEAF project whereby Zini, as the project team member, is reporting back to us as a Learning, Teaching and Assessment Strategy Committee. She's also involved in reporting back on a number of activities that we're actively involved in. I think that's been useful from both sides, because it acts as a deadline for herself, but also it keeps us informed of what actually is happening as the project is evolving. So we'd negotiate that, obviously, with yourselves once the project started. Just to finally just say what the requirements are, and we've alluded to them, and you're probably very familiar with the documentation already, but there is a requirement that we need to have at least one representative from each of the different subject disciplines. This is just to capture the breadth of the subject discipline base across the 3 institutions. So you need one from each of those 4. We also need to have a collaborative partner from each of the institutions, and we'd be negotiating our involvement afterwards. So you can take that as a given. The level of support, whether it's the minimum of 20 or a little bit more extensive up to 100, we negotiate. The submissions are going to be evaluated as we did with the LEAF project, which would have an internal group with external reviewers, and we are reviewing them on the basis of the cost. It's very much down to so what are you delivering for the cost? How cost efficient or effective are your targets and deliverables? This whole kind of comprehensiveness and the quality of the approach to the project, obviously that's going to be key to the success of that. What is your distinctive approach? And also expertise, experience and disciplinary diversity available through the team. That needs to be reflected within the application. Last time we had quite a number of applications, but some didn't have that breadth of knowledge or expertise across the application. So obviously they weren't selected. However wonderful that particular cluster of researchers was, it didn't actually meet the criteria. And there's also, I suppose, a little bit of kudos. Not only do you get the money, you can't actually see it bottom, sorry, it's cut off, but you actually can call yourselves TU Dublin Teaching Fellows for the duration of the project, which I think affirms the value that the institution is putting on the project. So now we have a question and answer session, and there's also some food outside, so it's a little bit less